On your mark. On your set. Hey, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co. And today we are reviewing Forsaken. And the we is interesting here because the we is, well, myself. We have Professor Meg over here. And then we have the designer of the game sitting next to me as I review his game. Hi, Travis. How's it going?
It's going great.
How's it going?
I can't wait to hear all of your thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. This, for the record, was his idea. And I thought it was so hilarious.
This was Jesse's idea.
Was it really?
Yes, and I thought it was hilarious. The
Even
idea
better.
Of it.
So,
captive audience.
Thoughts, opinions, questions.
Shout out to Jesse. We'll throw a link down to his channel because apparently this amazing idea was his. But you completely signed up for it, which is, and that's something, for the record, before we even dive into this, we'll talk a lot about the game, what's going on, we'll give some background, but like, you have been always with me whenever I talk about any of your games. You have been very vocal about like, no, just give it to me. Give me as direct as possible.
I like that. We've had candid conversations, like when you reviewed Renation. You told me you were going to review it, but you gave me your opinions beforehand. And then,
so I want to get more plays before I felt.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, I thought you were pulling my leg because it was a while later that the review came out, and then I was very impressed, and I appreciate it. One thing that I think that a lot of people might not realize is that creators and publishers, we actually really want real opinions. Like we want you to say, this isn't what I liked, this is who I think this game might be for, this game wasn't for me. That type of stuff is great, and it's not something a lot of people do. But Alex,
I try. I mean, there are people who are meaner than me. There are, but I do try to be critical.
I think you're honest. Think you're mean.
That's I always cringe with the word, but like I agree. I understand what you mean. I go for that. I cringe with it only because I don't love the implication that some people aren't. I would say I like to be politely critical. That's what I go for. But either way, we're going to be very polite. Honestly, the fact that Travis is here means I'm probably going to be less polite because it's more fun this way.
I want you to lay it on me because I already know some of your opinions. And you've played this 3 times now.
Correct. And it's changed with each play. With each play, my opinion of this has gone up. I still have critiques, but my opinion has certainly gone up. And we'll talk about this. But to give some background, this is Forsaken. This is an open sandbox adventure in which you have tons of backstory, tons of reading cards, lots of just wandering around this map over here from the various locations, 3 different planets, rolling dice in this, whole custom dice tray solution from Game Trays. All the inserts and everything will be, well, this is from Game Trays Labs, and so we're going to have a ton of just deluxeification. Everything you see here, by the way, is prototype, rules, components, and I guess opinions, subject to change as well. We'll throw a link down to the Kickstarter. But past that, we're not going to heavily go into this. If you want more of a detailed understanding of what's going on here, you can check out the gameplay we have on the channel. There's a 2-player gameplay, which I have to forget the title, but it's a 2-player gameplay with 3 people because Travis is like helping us run it all. But we have a 2-player gameplay over on here. There's going to be multiple gameplays over on other channels. You can check out a lot of that. But the general idea is open sandbox adventure, lots of character backstory, lots of just trying to figure out the best way to either end your character arc or get as many points as possible to trigger endgame before the other players and figure out your own strategic pathway forward in that. Anything I'm missing from a high-level thing we should cover?
No, I think that pretty much nails it.
Cool. So from there, we're going to dive into opinions, and we've all played this. Well, you've played it extensive amounts of times. We've all played this multiple times. I've played at different player accounts in different ways. I've tried now 3 different characters, and my opinion has shifted multiple times along the way. And as a starting baseline, I think one other thing I'll throw in, which I think you mentioned the other thing which is relevant, if you want more of a general comparison point, think of it as, if you've played Western Legends, think of this as Western Legends with a whole lot more in different ways. But that kind of feel to the game, so that might give you a little bit of a understanding. But from there, in terms of, I guess I'll start with you, Meg, if you're comfortable with it.
Sure.
I'm going to start with you. What's your opinion of the game? Like, what do you like about the game?
I very much enjoy it. There are a lot of things about mechanics that I enjoy, but that being said, it's very thematic. There's so much to read that you have different branching paths where you have choices, you have a lot of agency for what your character is doing, and a lot of the surprises are really fun. I think that's my favorite part. I really enjoy the gameplay itself, but I love the theme.
Cool. For myself, gameplay-wise, we'll talk, I guess we should divide it up into mechanics and theme, because there's a lot of both going on. The way you phrased it is this game is unapologetically, what's the way you phrased it?
It's unapologetically thematic.
Unapologetically thematic. You're reading stuff, and you're not reading a sentence at a time, you're reading paragraphs at a time. Each individual card you're reading often has multiple paragraphs. This, for context, is a short card, all things considered, and then you have full storybooks with full character arcs and tons of pathways. Your characters have their choice as far as how they move forward through the world, and overall, I enjoy most of that. Most with the caveat, we'll get to the caveat soon, but I enjoy most of that. Again, I've played through 3 different characters. I've seen the way each character has their choice, the way they can try to develop 3 different options over here. here, options that then tie into a degree of mechanical interweaving to the game that gives you just like a sense of like, and it's quirky as well. It's like, it's not just like, hey, here's 4 characters and some generic thing. They all have a degree of quirkiness that manages to work within this space opera of a cowboy adventure that just works really well. We have Grash with, I don't even know Grash, like Grash's whole backstory of kind of working with the planet, of trying to be revered, of trying to take down people. We've had Piers Falcray, who's returning to the planet to interact with his friends and to pick up where he left off. The last one I played as was the one who's trying to become the celebrity, trying to decide whether he films his adventure or goes on a more responsible documentary. And there's all these choices and agency as you go through it, and then that all weaves nicely into the way the planet gives you all that stuff. Every planet has its own deck of cards you're going to be playing with, different decks you can pull from, and then additionally you're going to be adding cards into those decks as you make choices. So as you make one choice, a card might be added that will show up in the next 3 cards, which means there's a degree of pacing and evolution as the planet and the game evolves and reacts to what you're doing. And that all works really well, mostly. The mostly for me is the part where I am very invested in my own story. I'm very invested in what's going on with me. I am a little bit invested, more and more as I play, especially at lower player counts. I found that I do get a little bit more invested in other stories, but I don't love a tons of excessive reading going on, and so having other people read their stories, at a certain point it gets a little harder to follow. So I would say, I think, like, to use the most recent game as an example, I think I was following my story arc, I would say I was following my everything and Meg's general story, but like when Meg drew a random card from the pile, I was kind of tuning it out as I planned for it on my turn. And so there's a degree of involvement with the story, but also there's enough going on and enough decision space around things that I pull out from some and involve myself in some of the rest. But like Meg said, I really enjoyed it. I like the story a lot. I think it is quirky, and I like the evolution of it. I like the fact that there's follow-up. I like the fact that Meg makes a choice about how the plants react to her, and that has follow-up 2-3 turns later, and then follow-up again 2-3 turns later. And I like how it doesn't feel like it feels like you're an active participant in the story and not just a bystander. Anything else there?
And I think this past game we had more things happen that could have affected all of us, where there were things that it would damage everyone on the planet. So I think it also depends just what cards come up for that interaction. But I agree that at a higher player count, it's harder to keep track, and it is such deep lore that it's kind of hard to keep every story in your mind as it's going and be planning your turn. That I felt like at 2 players it was a lot more engaging.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that more, but this last game was my first play at 2 players, and easily my favorite experience. I'm very happy we waited till this game to talk about it, because, well, I will talk about it more when we get to the mechanics aspect. But yeah, overall story, really enjoy. I think it does a great job participating in you. I think you should be wary of the fact that there is potentially a lot of reading, passing books around, adding cards in. There is maintenance that is a cost to that story. And I think the maintenance, like, I don't know what your experience has been as far as how little it can be minimized, but the maintenance to me is the biggest concern as far as the things I don't like about the story, because I like the consequences of how it's played out, but there's a degree of adding a card here, pulling that journal open, reading this here, and you kind of do need to work together with others, passing the book back and forth, having things read to you, having one person say, oh, can you look up C1 in that journal? And this also goes to my own perception, where until this gameplay, I thought playing it solo would be my favorite way to play this game. I think 2 players probably going to be my favorite, if only because the combination of those 2 gives you a degree of being able to work together to maintain the game state while moving it forward.
And before you move from theme, replayability-wise, like, there are a lot of choices that you make. So for my character, I played Grash. I've played her twice. I absolutely love her. I think there are still things I could do that I didn't explore with her. That being said, there are 12 characters.
There's going to be, well, if you get everything and you unlock everything and we hit all the stretch goals, there'll be 12 characters. Each character has a branching path, so you can technically play each character twice through their story. As you guys have seen, you don't always reach the end of your story, and there's actually something I forgot to do when I play is there's an epilogue that tells you all the things that you learn about the world as a result, and that is tied to these cards that come out up here, and then if a character reaches the end of their story. But we have another thing that's called, it's the class model. So you could play Grash or Pierce as like an assassin for the Ebon Eye.
Oh, that's
or
fun.
as like a low-level flunky for the cartel that happens to unlock a bunch of secret data that's super valuable and gets directly downloaded into your head, and now you're like, I'm the most wanted person on the planet. So it's almost like character agnostic. So you step outside of the character, you still use the character's general kit, which mechanically will always work, work, and then you can play as like a job effectively. Like, what if Grash was a cartel flunky?
How many different classes are a rough number?
There should be 12 in total. It is a tremendous amount. So
each character can be played with each class?
Each character can be played with each class.
With two stories.
Yes, each character is an archetype with the class system. So, like, Grash is a brute. Pierce is I can't remember. He is an archetype in the game, but his story with the assassin would be different than her story with the assassin.
So 288 combinations before you even get to the variation of just general gameplay.
Correct. And that doesn't count the fact that the decisions that you make within your character also have other decisions that can cascade. Right. And I think the thing, if I'm allowed to say something about, one thing that Mike, the co-designer, and I wanted to do is, like, we asked ourselves, and this is kind of like a grandiose claim, but I feel comfortable making it, is like, what would be the next generation of storytelling game be? And part of that kind of unapologetic length and complexity and depth and maintenance is a part of that, because if you want to have a really rich experience, if you don't want it just to be, you meet a guy, the guy says this, get a gray resource. If you want it to be something that has lasting consequences, that changes the landscape of the world, that kind of unfolds and interconnects and bumps up against your own stories, that comes at a cost, and that cost is time and complexity, right? Yeah. So we decided to lean into that instead of lean away. The first draft of this, we leaned away from it, and then we're like, at one point, I just remember saying to Mike, I don't care if the game's an hour per player. I think it's best for an hour per player. So we're coming after a very specific demographic of person. Like, if you don't like you're saying, your judgments are absolutely right. If you don't like a lot of excessive reading, if you're not super heavily invested in lore, then I don't think this is probably going to be the game for you.
Is there plans, or are there plans for any digital companion or app, anything?
We are currently in the process of talking with some digital partners that would help to do all of the reading portion so that the players wouldn't have to.
So to me, I mean, more than just the reading, even the evolution of, like, you tap, like, this choice and then the card gets added, like, these decks become simulated, kind of like a Gloomhaven helper for this game. Anything
is possible. I mean, and honestly, that stuff is tied to
and the fans can even do it.
The funding. Yeah, this game is big. It is grandiose in its production, but all of these components are functional. They serve as storage, and they serve as something that's pretty. They serve as storage, and they have functionality. I mean, that's the driver behind all of this initially, was how does Game Trays make a game instead of just help make components for other people's games, and that was the starting point for this whole project.
Cool, because I'll come back to the app soon, because when we get into the stuff that I'm trying to be critical of, but we'll get to that more.
I'm disappearing.
Oh no, all good. So before, I think we're done with story.
Yeah.
I'll move to mechanics. Meg.
So, mechanics, and I think this kind of ties back to what we talked about. I think it's a really fun engine that you can build for yourself, but you're really only invested in your engine. There were things that you were doing that I was still paying attention to what you're doing and kind of keeping track of how quickly you were progressing, but what you were actually doing with all of your stuff, I wasn't really paying attention to. So I really enjoyed it. I enjoy the weapon system. I enjoy the combat system with dice rolling. Do you want to explain it a little?
Sure. Well, dice rolling system in general just involves you rolling a handful of dice down this dice tower. Generally, you're going to have a variable number of dice for yourself and the enemies you're fighting. You'll dictate the color. You'll roll them down here, and then depending on how they flow down here, you'll see where they roll and what good things and bad things happen to you along the way. These crit symbols over here double the effect over here. So, for example, if the white player over here, whether it's you or whoever, has 3 hits because there's no negative damage here, and then down here has another 2. Is there damage? I can't even see.
Yeah, there's damage
here.
Yeah. Oh, no, not on this one. There's no damage.
So it's going to be 4 plus another 3 is going to be a total of 7 hits with no damage from white. And then blue is getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hits, but then also dealing 1 damage because of that. So you can see the way these criticals affect the rolls. And then you have the dice tower. And then there's other things you can do as well in terms of abilities that let you shift dice around or roll extra dice or add modifiers to those. But that's the general combat system. And it's used for combat, but also for some other things in the game where you can be rolling for other effects.
Yeah, so for games that, either use modifier decks or dice, I think that's fun. I think this is better. I really think this mechanic was a lot of fun. It was very engaging. It made you excited when you were rolling. I mean, you are just rolling dice, but then it can change the outcome. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's good. And I agree. I think the thing I want to hit upon that you said is, like, I agree with almost everything you said there offhand. I like a lot of the mechanics of the game. I like the cards. I like the abilities you have, the way your weapons upgrade as old weapons become kind of mods to new weapons. I like the general fact that there's a lot of pathways forward. There's a lot, like, every single thing is like, okay, great. Which arc do I want to take towards moving towards points effectively? Do I want to try to cash things in at the ruins? Do I want to try to interact with the various factions in the headquarters and accomplish missions for them? How much am I pursuing my own goals versus kind of viewing them as something tangential one-dimensional to what I'm doing as I just try to strive for points. Do I want to heal because it's important? Do I want to get my gear back by starting next to a pylon? There's a million things you can do, and the efficiency and optimization around your 3 actions as you move around the board, as you take actions, as you try to plan around your end of round encounter. Every round, in the round, you'll have an encounter based on what symbols you'll next to, or most rounds, depending where you go. And there's all these small little decision points as far as how you optimize and how you try to figure out that pathway towards points. It's all about the pathway towards points. And there's a ton of things you can do. Even just the last game we played, I sat there and went to like a whole bunch of scrap heaps to gather gear to buy weapons, and then you sat there and you're like, I will hunt for scrap.
Weapons.
Never. And so there's like a ton of pathways in this game. I think the biggest negative offhand, and I have other negatives to get to, but one of the big, I shouldn't phrase it as the biggest negative because I don't think it is. I think one of the potential negatives, depending on how much you care, is the lack of interaction. Is the fact that for the most part there are 2 kinds of interaction in this game. There's peripheral interaction where you can kind of get something that someone else took. So for example, just even at the end game, the fact that the scrap was not here and the scrap was at the other location, scrounging over there, that had a small impact on what I could and couldn't do. And so you'll have those things where someone gets to one of the what do they call again? The people.
The personas.
Personas. You get to someone will get to a persona, moving them around the board. Someone will get to the scrounging, moving that around the board. There are these small little aspects where someone gets to something first. Someone will hunt down the bounty before you get there. So there is that kind of peripheral engagement. And then the other kind of engagement is direct head-to-head interaction, which generally is only going to happen once you start having events or infamy in play that motivate it. Because otherwise, attacking someone just to beat them up doesn't even help you, so what's the point?
I wanted to attack you so bad.
You didn't. The whole game. You could have destroyed me. You were such a heavy
I destroyed everything else instead.
Yeah. And so I think the one turn you're like considering it, I was actually at the clinic and I was safe. The net result is that the interaction in the game is on the low end, at least from the gameplays we've had so far. I wouldn't even call that the biggest negative. That's why I changed my language, because I don't mind that. I think interaction in games does change the experience in different ways, and I think actually for me, this goes back to how my opinion has changed and evolved as I played it. I think my favorite player count right now is 2. I've only played it at 3 and 2 to be very clear. Don't know the one, it's all good. You could mute it, but whatever.
Yeah, that's what I do.
What's it called? My favorite player count, I played this at 3 and 2, and for a while I thought my favorite player count would probably be playing the solo mode, but I think actually playing it at 2 was a really good mix of me feeling invested enough in the race between myself and Meg, trying to figure out how our pathways forward, as we kind of peripherally cross paths here and there, the occasional threat that she might destroy me and just stomp on me, trying to get to various locations first, but it's mostly... I really like... I don't need the interaction, and the interaction means that I can play this as a 2-player game as opposed to a 3 or 4-player game without feeling like I'm heavily compromising on the experience, which means I get more playtime to experience ratio. Yeah, so overall, the interaction is something you should be mindful of, but for myself, not a problem at all. Any thoughts or comments about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I was the studio head at Colossal Games that signed and developed... Western Legends, and Western Legends is there's a clear nod to Western Legends in this, but a big difference in this and Western Legends is confrontational as all get out. You just beat the snot, you can rob each other, you can knock each other down. There's all the peripheral and indirect stuff, like the moving targets that you're talking about in that game, but there's like direct face smashing in that too.
Lots more.
With this game being so focused on your goals and your feats as being like kind of not just like as a way to score points and win the game, but also as like an indicator of like, hey, here's some things that you want to try to do in order to kind of guide play without putting you completely on rails. Throwing in like smashing people's face just for the sheer joy of making them sad feels like an unnecessary element of the game. The infamy kind of pops up and it starts to be emergent, and then suddenly you start to see people care, and they're like, wait a minute, you got 3 infamy, and if I beat you in a fight, I'll go here and ding this and get these powers and get victory points, and it'll knock you down because you have a card that's abusing your infamy on top of that, and there's a card up here that says whoever has the most infamy at the end of the game gets a point. Like, so you have those moments, and I would rather have fewer of those moments that are more meaningful than just like pervasive antagonistic player interaction that I personally think would drag the game down.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a plus. Not to ding Western Legends, but part of my problem with Western Legends for me is the fact that I do feel Western Legends, to some extent, I feel has some of the same problems as Forsaken does for me, where I mostly care about my turn and I'm less invested in yours. But because there's enough interaction, I feel that Western Legends at lower player counts does feel like a compromise, versus this one doesn't because of the way the game's designed. And so for me, that's a huge plus. Although again, depends what you're looking for.
Sure.
As far as Anything else mechanically you want to touch upon? Because I have a complaint I want to get to, my biggest complaint still. But
what?
I have a nice thing to say, so I'll save it.
You can say nice things. No.
I'll wait for your complaint.
The
Yeah,
sandwich approach to delivery. We have positive
good
feedback,
cop, bad
negative.
cop.
Yeah, good cop, bad cop. My biggest thing about this, and this goes to, we touched upon this in the story as well, and I think it's true mechanically as well, is I think this game has a very high barrier to entry that there's a lot going on in different ways. There's a lot going on from the management, there's a lot going on from just how much you have to pick up. There's charts full of all the various locations, all the things that are going on, all the stuff you have to learn, the ways this interacts with that, the way you're going to have to grab this card and move it here and shuffle this card in there, everything from the actual physical maintenance to just the amount of stuff you have to pick up going in means this does, to me, have a high barrier to the enjoyment versus just basic understanding and movement forward. Like, for me, like, I'm 3 games in, and the first game felt like a write-off to just learn the game. The second game felt like, oh, this is cool, I'm enjoying this, but I still only care about my turn, I don't care about yours. And the third game, this one we just played, was easily my favorite, where I both have a much higher understanding of how everything's going on, and the playtime to investment ratio was significantly better. Like, I loved racing towards the finish with you. The fact that we had a close game the entire time, that's me trying to save face from the facts you won, so I'm going to say it again. The fact that we had a close game the entire time, the fact that it seemed multiple times as if I could win, that kept me invested heavily, even though I didn't.
It's because you're bankrolling.
Kept me invested heavily in the experience, and I had a lot of fun with this experience. But the potential downside there, especially from someone who plays games the way I tend to, is I don't know how many people give a game like this 2, 3, 4 plays before, like, at what point that investment to ratio pays off. And this is a good time to note prototype and all that stuff. Things could change in different ways. Things become more accessible. I believe you're still changing in different things and whatnot, and player aids and who knows what. But I think there's so much going on here in a way that makes the third play so much more enjoyable than it would be if there was less going on, but in a way that potentially might block people to getting to that third play, depending on their experience, especially if they have the same, I guess, preferences I do, as the fact that, like, I do not care about your turns. A Meg's turn I'm fine with because I need time to plan my turn. The third person's turn I really don't care about, and the fourth person's turn, I just take me out of here entirely. But yeah, that's where I am with, that's my biggest concern or negativity about the game.
Yeah.
Just,
Fair.
yeah.
No,
you can end it there.
Well, no, I mean, this is once again, this is like, so if we try, it's kind of like, when we were trying to go in and do some editorial stuff to this, Mike and I were very, and especially after I showed you the game the first time, because you were suggesting things like truncated story sections to kind of speed up play. And then the analogy I use is...
I care less about that now, by the way.
I can tell.
Yeah.
But the analogy I used when I came back from that trip was, hey, I'd like to play basketball, but I don't like running, and I also don't like touching the ball. Can you tell me how I can participate in this game without doing these fundamental aspects that are intrinsic to playing basketball? And that's not a criticism of the shoot.
I understand.
That is we are making a game for a type of person. This is kind of like, I think people who like role-playing style games, I think Gloomhaven did a really good job of having a feeling of character development and things like that, while also having a mechanical element. Like, this game does have, like, if this game just stripped out the story and you were just this engine, it would still be a fun game. Yeah. Like, with a more shallow story. But we're kind of like consciously making that decision at potentially, you know, cutting off an audience base by making it less accessible. But, you know, that's the question, right? Like, it is kind of it's kind of a strange thing to be like, let's consciously make this game for a particular type of audience and hope that that audience is one that can grow into the game. As I'm sure you know, you guys look at games all the time. I make games, and it's the same thing. If I play a game once, it's a miracle. I played Nemesis recently twice and enjoyed it. I played Dune Imperium 93 times.
That's fantastic.
Not kidding, 93. That is a miracle that I've played that game that many times. But most games I play once, you know?
Yeah, and that's my concern as well. Even before I got to reviewing games, I used to say, I don't give games a second chance. If you can't hook me on the first, and I'm not saying the game isn't good. The game could be amazing. But there's so many games that aren't good, and how many plays do I want to give them? The trade-off is, like I said already, I do think this game would feel like a compromise if it was less complex. I feel it would not be as good. I am concerned, though, about how many people will potentially have the experience that I am. The way they browse the games like you and I do, where they might sit there and say, hey, this was fun, but there's a lot going on. I don't know if I care for a second play.
Yeah.
I think this game is fantastic, and I think my plays of this game have gotten significantly better. And for a while, like my original plan for this coverage before we played this third game is I was going to say, hey, I think Forsaken's a great game that I want to play solo and don't want to play with other players. And now that's changed, and I won't know until I play it solo, but now Forsaken's a great game that I want to play at 2 players and I don't want to play at other player counts. But I really enjoy just the vast everything going on here. I enjoy the story. I enjoy the pathways. I enjoy the variety of the characters, the variety of the experience. I enjoy the evolution of my choices, of seeing it all unfold. I enjoy the dice rolling. I'm not as much of a fan. Oh, Meg's biggest complaint. We haven't gotten to Meg's biggest complaint.
What's my biggest complaint?
The fact that you're capped out at 6 dice.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You
More
cap
dice.
at combat dice.
Yeah, it's
I was
tough.
going to say, to follow up with what you were saying, I think everything you're saying is valid. That being said, as someone who has played so many hours into Gloomhaven, for something like this, with the replayability, with how many characters there are, and if you are usually playing a 2 to 3 player, I think that you would want it to be this complex by the time you're hitting that point. Like, I couldn't picture myself bringing this out every Friday and not having it be this much.
I agree.
I wouldn't want any less.
I'm just worried about the people who would be just scared away from that initial onboarding, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then I was going to say something else a second. Oh, and another thing I do want to touch upon that's not a concern for me at all, and I have no idea because I'm not involved in playtesting. I can't speak for player balance at all. For character balance, I have no clue what you're doing to make that or not. I don't even care. I've had fun playing the game, and I've never felt not competitive playing the game, having played 3 different characters, and so I'm fine with all that, but, like, the characters are vastly different enough in their goals, in what they do, and how they move forward, that, like, I mean, even the fact that Grash is sitting here with, you know, her 11 health, and her extra 4th action every single round, and just, it feels insane. But then again, I have, you know, Pierce Falcry, who is personally my favorite character from the 3 I've played so far, because I can just speed around the map, which is also one of the things that us playing with other characters I always found a little bit crippling, is while there's many ways to teleport around the board and get around spots, I always felt like a little bit like I wanted to drop more movement. As Piers, I'm like, I can get anywhere at any time, it's all good, that's fine. And so every character has their own strength, but that could lead to potential balance issues. I have no idea what you're doing for that. I'm just bringing it up as a potential thing with 12 characters and 12 arcs and all that stuff in a competitive game that could be a concern. I'm not worried about it, but just bringing it up. But past that, I think where I leave off, if we drift to final thoughts, if you're ready for final thoughts, I really enjoy Forsaken a lot, and I'm looking forward to playing this a lot more at 2 players, and I still want to try the solo mode. It's a game that, for me, I would need to have my arm twisted in some particular reason to try it at higher player counts again, because I found higher player counts, I'm signing up for another hour and a half of gameplay, and I'm not getting anything extra out of the experience. I think that there will be people who will be totally fine with that, who will be more invested, who are there more for the story. I'm still here primarily for mechanics first. I enjoy the story, I absolutely do, but I'd rather play 2 games of Forsaken at 2 players than play a 3 or 4 player game of Forsaken and feel I got half the mechanics and twice the story out of it. And so I like it a lot. It has grown on me more and more as I've played. I like even for my first play, to be very clear, even for my first play, I liked it. But I liked it I think after game 1, I said, I love my turns, I don't care about the rest of the time. After game 2, I was like, I still love my turns, and I like the game even more. My improvement went up, but the still not caring stayed the same. Game 3 is where it hit the sweet spot for me because of the player count, and also because Pierce Falcry is awesome. But overall, I'm really enjoying this. I'm enjoying the depth. I'm enjoying the story. I'm enjoying basically everything here. I am concerned about the maintenance aspect of how much, like, I really, going back to what I mentioned about an app, I really hope someone comes up with an app for this. Where, like, Gloomhaven Helper, you can just tap it, you're like, hey, we're on, you know, Planet Thyrria over here, let's go ahead and pop that card. Oh, great, we just had this interaction. Boom, a card gets randomly shuffled in. If some of the maintenance could be lessened even more, and even potential help aspects, like, oh, what is the location, having the player aid. This is, like, I'm not heavily into apps, but an app like what Gloomhaven Helper does for Gloomhaven for this game could take an already good experience and even take further out of the potential barriers or maintenance or legwork. No flipping through a manual, rather you just tap something and move to the next stop. I really enjoy this. I really hope someone, whether you or a fan, develops an app for this so I can play it even more, and also for solo mode and all those things. But overall very positive. Some barrier to entry kind of complaints or critiques, but past that, I think Forsaken's pretty awesome. Yeah, I don't know if you have final thoughts.
Yeah, I wanted to actually hit on something you said earlier too about balance. I completely agree because we've only seen certain characters, but to me, the gameplay has felt very balanced every time we've played, which I think is really great. That, like, us ending 2 points away from each other with how different our abilities are and me having extra actions. How frequently
it felt like I was about to win. I agree. Yeah.
So that's something I usually appreciate in games, especially for a game like you're saying. It's such an investment, a lot of time. I look for it to be really balanced and be that close, because if someone's just going ahead of someone else, it's not as fun. Yeah, overall, I really enjoyed it. I'm someone who is a serial replayer, that this is something that I would love to play over and over and learn all the stories and be calling the characters by name and knowing what they do. So it's definitely something that engages me.
Yeah, and that does happen. Again, even from play 1 to play 2 to play 3, you continuously learn characters, you learn spots, you get a better familiarity with the game. I didn't even talk about how awesome the spoils cards are. One of my favorite parts of the game, doing the gameplay, I think I mentioned it, but like one of my favorite parts of the game is drawing spoils cards. They just feel broken in so very different ways. It feels like you're going dungeon driving for treasure, and it's so much fun. But like, yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of fun things here. I'm really enjoying Forsaken. As far as rating, early rating and whatnot, to me this one's easily a 4 to 5. I really enjoy it a lot what it's doing while having those concerns for barrier to entry. I could see it growing as well, especially with an app, especially something that makes those small aspects that are even less of a factor. But overall, I like it a lot. I like it a lot.
Thanks.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks for letting us play.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for playing. And until we make an app, I'll just come over to your house and do all the stuff that you...
Oh, that was fun.
All the boring stuff for you, right?
No, I'll still do those things. I don't mind. Again, with 2 players, I think you have that nice back and forth aspect. I don't think it's that bad. But that's the aspect. Without the app, I think 2 players has mentally... I haven't played a solo, I can't say for sure. But I think mentally 2 players has shifted to my preferred player count for this game. With an app, I don't even need Meg here. I can win on my own.
And I do think if it was just the 2 of us, you are more invested in the story because you're reading it to the other person. Yeah. So you're going through exactly what it is. And a lot of this flavor text is funny. It's silly. Some of it, they're yelling. They're doing different stuff. So I think that, too, that reading the flavor text for other people...
I'm pretty sure you tore a robot limb from limb just to pull apart its
for resources.
Body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He volunteered as tribute.
There's a lot of things like that. There's a lot of fun choices of agency characters of different kinds, and a vast variety of characters. Anything from the style and politics too. We didn't even see it this game. We saw it in one of our other games where like some of these characters just completely turned against us and shut off their. There's a lot of fun things. A lot of fun things. But yeah,
we wanted to have lots of different voices in the game too. I think some of these, and I'll say this as a guy who's done world building for games like Aeon's End, like the first Aeon's End stuff is so dire, and Sydney Ingleston came in and she took over after I left Indie Boards and Cards, and she brought like this totally different voice to the game. And that's one thing that like Mike is absolutely amazing about is all the kind of the charm, the little cute robot that gave you the gun, you know, and he's like scrambling off into the desert awkwardly. All those little moments. So it captures lots of different emotions and feelings and stories, not just like, you know, we're all tough and we're fighting all the time. Like that happens, but not as much as you probably would think in a game like this.
Yeah, I mean, this last game was easily the most conflict-driven ever from the ones we played.
She was like a weapon of mass destruction. I honestly was surprised. As soon as she gained that infamy, I was waiting for her to just be here and go, wait, so if I smash your face and you go to the clinic, I get 2 points?
Yeah. I was expecting it. I was surprised she didn't tank me.
It wasn't worth it at that time.
She's like, there's other ways to get points. Other ways.
Yeah, I got 6 points that turn. So.
It was insane. In any case, that's basically it. That's Forsaken. There'll be a link down below to the Kickstarter. As I said already, plenty of other content from gameplays over on this channel to other content elsewhere. And that is that. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co.
I'm Professor Meg.
And I'm Travis Chance.
And have a good one.